well, visual art and mathematics help and support each other. Grade 3 is, of course, a very important grade because it is the bridging towards grade 4 in the intermediate phase, where our learners really need support at this stage, especially after COVID. So I'm not going to do the presentation, but Liesl Hartman will do the presentation, and it is an absolute honor for me to introduce to you Liesl Hartman, who is the director for the Center of Education at the Zuidsmokka in Cape Town. If you haven't been to the Zuidsmokka, if you're in Cape Town, please go there. Your life will be changed. Liesl is also an art teacher, most importantly, and she was the principal of the Peter Clark Art Center before she went into the Zuidsmokka. But without further ado, Liesl, I am so interested to see how you are going to combine mathematics and visual arts.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thanks, Anina, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. It's lovely to be here. So just from my side to say to everybody, I'm an art teacher at heart, and that is what I feel that I do, no matter what my job involves in other ways. And so I'm constantly thinking about ways in which to make art accessible for children. I work at the Museum of Contemporary Art Africa in Cape Town, and as such, I have to engage with many different schools that come from many different contexts. And we often are in a situation where we are needing to tailor make a workshop for a particular school, depending on where they are from, the numbers of children, how old they are, their experience of Cape Town, of museums, their exposure to art or not. So I'm presenting this workshop not as a one-size-fits-all, okay, but hopefully to give you some idea of how art related to maths can be offered and how it can be offered in different contexts. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Zuidsmokka. And I'm going to use what I love doing when I teach. I love actually, I have digital presentations, but I also like working with actual physical imagery. I like putting it on the desks in front of young people and children so that they can look at things and take their time to really kind of explore visual images. But this is the Zuidsmokka. It's a side view of it. 100 years ago, it was a grain silo, and grain was actually stored in those cylinders which you see there. And at the moment, the elevator side of the building, there's a hotel on the top. So the museum actually exists within those cylinders. And what they actually did is that they cut those cylinders open and literally scooped them out like you would ice cream. And let me tell you, it was much harder than scooping ice cream. And then they dropped the museum boxes inside that architectural structure, and that is what exists today. So when I describe that, especially to young children, and I say to them, you know what a cylinder is? And we talk about basic shapes. So we talk about that's a circle. And when a circle becomes a three-dimensional form, then it becomes a cylinder. And I know that that is a thing that you are needing to deal with in the grade 3 curriculum, is that children need to know what shapes are and how those exist in the world in terms of a three-dimensional quality as well. So that's the cylinder. And what they did in order to make the silos 100 years ago is that they put 42 cylinders together like that, and each of those silos was filled with some kind of grain. And they also actually filled grain in the in-between spaces to balance the weight and the pressure in the building, which is something that I learned that I didn't know. And then that was actually scooped out when Thomas Heatherwick did the redesign for the museum. And so when I did this lesson, I was called by a teacher to say, there's this particular grade, a group of grade 3s, they never have art. Can you please come and do something with them? So when somebody asks me that, I think, I want to give these children the absolute best kind of art experience. And very often children don't have access to painting. Painting is not easy to do if you don't have an art room. It's messy, it's a lot of prep, all of those things, but it's the most wonderful things for children to engage in. And so I planned a painting lesson. And I presented this lesson not in the classroom, but in the hall space that they had given me to work with children. So I was able to engage with drama and do a lot around sort of body movement and then work from that space into the visual art space. But I had to decide, what am I going to do with the grade threes? So I went, and I always do, I go back to the curriculum, because I like what I do to reinforce the work that teachers are doing in the classroom, so that learning becomes richer in different ways. And what I discovered was that there was a section there on shape. There was a section there which dealt with counting, numbering, patterning, sequencing, all of those sorts of things, all the things that I'd forgotten about, because now my boys are now 20 and 16 years old. So I forgot that they were learning all those things and they were in grade 3. And I found a really great way of connecting the museum and helping the children to understand who this strange person was coming in doing this art lesson and why they were coming in. So I like to talk about the museum and give children a sense of what that is, and so on. So I linked the architecture of the building, which was really about, which is about shape in every kind of way. These, for example, are the windows of the building. They are cylinders and so on. So triangles, cylinders, circles, all of those things is what tweaked my inspiration for this lesson. And then I decided that it was also important for them not only just to paint, but because they don't have a lot of art, one of the essential things that we're asking children to differentiate when they go into intermediate phase is that there's creating 2D and there's creating 3D. So that understanding that there are representations in the visual art that are flat, and then there are other kinds of creations of visual art that happen in the round. So I wanted them to have that understanding. So I planned a lesson which was to begin with pattern making, with basic color mixing, getting them to understand what the primary colors were. When you mix that together, what happens with paint and so on. And then from that stage to take it into 3-dimension. And so what was created at the end of the day was a project which I call the art box. Okay. And these were some of the examples that I did in preparation for that lesson. Okay. This lesson, just to say to those art teachers that are out there, that you can do it in any medium. You don't have to do it in paint. You can work with crayon, you can work with oil pastel, you can even work with collage. Okay. For those teachers who have very little resource and who struggle to just kind of put an art lesson together and say, well, I don't have a budget for it or whatever, this lesson can also be done with A4 white paper and wax crayon and a little bit of glue. Okay. And with that, and with this lesson, you can teach the basics of color mixing, shape, 2 and 3 dimension, and you can introduce the notion of simple timetable, the 2 times table, the 3 times table, and the 4 times table. So what did I do? Let me show you the little boxes, first of all, that I created. Okay, so these were the small art boxes that I created simply from white A4 paper. This one just with, sorry, my left and my right are switched around on the on the screen. This one just with wax crayon and white paper, a little bit of glue, and that was just with Koki pen. Okay, so literally you could use pencil crayons as well. And so the thing about art teaching and doing every lesson, I've been teaching for 30 years. And with every lesson that I do, and even with this presentation, I get tremendously nervous that I have prepared everything well and that I haven't forgotten everything. So the thing about teaching art in any of the art forms is that you have to try it yourself, yeah, to some extent. You have to, as the educator, experience that making or that creation, whatever it is, the music, the dance, or the drama, by trying it out yourself. You can't teach children and you can't transfer that experience to children if you have not tried it out, because children, as you know, will see right through you. Okay, they will know if you know what you are about or not. So I always say to young teachers also that I'm training. Okay, you must make the examples, not to put the example there as the thing that 30, 40, however many children are going to copy, and they're all going to make a box that looks like this. But to give them and to give yourself the idea of where the pitfalls are in the lesson as well. Some children, particularly if we're teaching special needs children, need to see where they are going. Okay, so it's very nice. I like surprise elements in art making. Okay, but for example, if you're working with a special needs class, you can't just ask them to do anything. Some of them, if they don't know where it's heading. So immediately they'll settle, and their anxiety settles if you say, we are creating a painted box today, okay? And we have to do a number of steps to get there. And then you put it away, okay? Because you don't want 40 of the same copies. And for this exercise, it's very structured, okay? People will say, well, there's not a lot of sort of creative imagination, but you'll be surprised at what begins to happen when the pattern making begins. And it is very step by step, but I think within that, there's a lot of learning that actually happens. And with the children that I taught at that school that had made this request from me, I had at the end of the session, there were 50 odd very different looking art boxes. There was not one box that was the same, and I had given the same instruction to that whole class. So I think that's very important. So for this lesson, when I started, I worked with very ordinary liner cover. I worked with an A1 sheet to make the sort of big, the bigger boxes, which are these ones. And I divided it into 4. And A1 is about 59 centimeters by 84. And if you fold it into 4 sections, you can just cut it directly. So there's no real measuring that you have to do at this point. Okay. So out of 1 sheet, you get 4. So if you have a class of 40, you basically need 10 sheets of card. You don't have to use this card. You can use whatever card you have and that's accessible to you. But whatever you do, try it out first so that the box doesn't flop or that becomes so soggy with paint or whatever it is, okay? Because you don't want to disappoint the children in the process and then they think it's a mess and then they're not actually enjoying it. So this is liner cover. They call it cape liner. They call it pattern card. Dressmakers use it to actually make the patterns for garments as well. So it's very nice, sturdy stuff to work with. And then what I did was I did some measuring. Okay. Now you'd be surprised, folks, that over time I've done many sort of teacher training sessions and whatever and teaching, and I still find that I get groups of learners from across the board, okay, who don't know how to use this little device, okay, the ruler. Okay, they are still uncertain how to measure from one point and how to get 5 centimeters and so on. Some of them measure from the end of the ruler, and we know that that's not the way that the measurements happen. They happen from naught. Some rulers have a naught. This one doesn't. It just says millimeters. Okay, so ruler skills and measuring skills, okay, is something that I have found both learners and teachers actually struggling with. Okay, and even in that foundation phase, the children are learning to count. Okay, so for them to look at a ruler and to see the numbers, that information is going in a different way. They're not necessarily just reciting it in class for you because apparently they've got to count up until 1,000, but they're actually seeing the sequencing on the ruler. They're seeing how the symbols and the shape of the numbers fit on the surface. Okay, so they're learning in all kinds of other ways, and their brain is firing in a whole lot of ways. So this ruler is actually really important. Anyway, I took my piece of liner cover and I divided it up, okay? And what I found very nicely to get a very nice, so this looks like a square, but it's actually a, and maybe it's because of the pattern, so maybe I shouldn't hold that one up, but it's actually a rectangle, okay? So you speak to children about that. And of course, every lesson is a language lesson. It's vocabulary, okay? It's visual literacy. So what I often do in my lesson, I stick that word up on the board so that they can see. Circle, that's what the word looks like. So you're reinforcing language all the time. Anyway, to get back here, I measured across. So this is actually 12 centimeters, each of the little blocks. And you'll notice here that there are 5 sides and not 4. Okay, so a cube, which is the form which happens when you take a rectangle or a square, okay, and you turn it into 3 dimensions, you have what becomes a 4-sided object. But this has 5 sides. Sorry, my left and my right swung around. Okay, so this is the 5th side over here. Also, you need a structure that closes at the bottom, okay? And so that's why you have this space at the bottom here. because what will happen is you'll get the learners to actually divide 1 to 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that fifth square is what they cross off at the bottom. So they're not going to cross that off. Now, we get to a point here. Do we let learners do this whole process on their own? If they're working with a big card like this, it's going to take you a lot of time to get them all at that point. Or do you prepare as the teacher? Okay, so I prepare as the teacher. I actually prepare a sheet that looks like this. If I'm working on this size, I have done all my measuring. So I create a little template, which I put on, and then I just draw the lines very quickly. And basically, while you're watching the news or whatever, you can just quickly cut and draw your lines, and after an hour you're done and you've prepped about 40 of these sheets. Okay, so there is prep that has to happen as well. So once you've done this, then you get into the actual lesson with the learners as well. So once they've identified the 4 pieces like that, I get them to fold the end away because we don't need that right now. Okay. And I also get them to fold on the bottom green line. Sorry, I've got some other examples here, which I forgot to bring. I'm back on your screen. I'm back on your screen. Let me just get it for you. Sorry about that. So now they've measured, possibly, or you've measured, and now the folding happens. And this is also really important for fine motor skills. So they've got their 4 squares. And this one I've actually numbered it on the bottom, okay, which is also fine. They have folded the red X away. I've done that in chalk. And then they also fold those bottom lines. So when they're working on their pattern making that's to come, that's all that they've got. So they're not distracted by any of the other information. Okay. And that's quite important. Otherwise, they start painting the bottom and all of those sorts of things. And then you introduce the notion of pattern making. And it's a really beautifully visual part of the lesson. I'm wearing a top that looks a little bit like the kente cloth that they weave in Africa. It's not real kente cloth. I wish it was. Okay. But there's so many examples from the continent of beautiful examples of pattern making. But if you didn't have that just around in your room, just even in this very office space that I'm standing in, there are patterns all around me, in the filing cabinet, in the windows, in the lights above my head, okay, because of that repeated element of shape, which creates that. And then, of course, when you start alternating those shapes and then you add color, that's when the richness of that really begins. And also in grade 3, they are wanting you to deal with looking at man-made and man-made pattern in the world, but they're also wanting you to look at organic. So you can actually bring that in as a comparative visual for them and actually show them the differences between that. And what works for foundation phase, the notion of opposites or contrast works really nicely with them. So here's your 4 blocks. I know my time's running out quite quickly. And then you show them a number of examples, okay? And then you get into the pattern making, okay? At this point, this is where you start talking about your times tables, okay? So you are saying we have 4 squares if they choose to work in squares or if they choose to work in triangles. I start with very basic shapes, okay? So don't start with things like hexagons and pentagons and things like that. It becomes very complicated, okay? You start with a simple shape and you actually say, I only want you to work in rectangles or squares, or I only want you to work in triangles. So you are kind of directing that. Also, it leads to a much cleaner, okay, and clearer outcome that is bold and quite beautiful at the end, the less complicated the pattern is, okay? And I'll talk to you about that and about giving children the creative space at the end as well to embellish and to extend what they are doing, okay? There's a teacher there that says maybe if you divided the process into smaller steps and allowed for more time to explain, and not just to get to the final product, that will resonate more with the learners and become more inclusive, safe space that should also help with discipline. Of course, okay, I'm rushing through this quite a bit, but if I was offering this as a 2-hour workshop, everything would be a lot slower, okay? And I'd also give them a physical exercise that they embody that learning around shape. We would also have spent a lot more time with looking at that architectural structure, which is the Zeitsmoker building, and speak about that as well. And then the follow-up to this workshop would also be that the learners visit the museum if they are from Cape Town, okay? So they begin to actually experience that building in its actual form. So yes, this seems very fast at the moment, but I'm just sort of accelerating it for you so that you have a sense of the project at the end. So they begin with their simple shapes, okay? And then you can start talking about, this is the 2 times table. There's 2. Sorry, wrong one, because I'm left and right. There's 2 times 2 gives you 4. Okay, I know teachers work with counters and little shapes on their table. Okay, and that's the way that you work, and you know how to teach multiplication better than I do at foundation phase. But you do those processes, and then this lesson would reinforce it in a way. Okay, it would manifest that same knowledge, but in a different way as well. Some other examples of what I've done just using squares. So this would be your 3 times table. Okay. And then that would be a 4 times table, and so on and so forth. Okay. And then once they've done the patterning, and the thing is actually to insist with them that each of the squares or each of their spaces, their rectangles 1 to 4, are the same. Okay. So that you actually get the pattern at the end of the day. Some children will want to put 1 square there and 2 square there's and then a triangle and then a circle or whatever, okay? And even just to get them to accept that instruction as something that they have to do is quite hard, because you know, if you've got paint and chalks and things going, it's very exciting, and children want to go, okay? So you need to hold the rein a little bit so that your outcome is actually what you want, and the understanding of that multiplication and that numeracy issue and the sequencing, okay, becomes something that they understand. They are also expected at foundation phase to count in 2s, to count in 4s, okay? So you can actually do that exercise with them. You can say, okay, who has made 4 squares in there as their pattern? And then let's count all of those together. And then you can have 2 children's works together, so that you can extend that multiplication beyond a 4 times, and you can go 5 times, 6, 7, and 8 times, which includes the whole timetable. My time is running out, but eventually, once the patterns and all of that have been created, and I've done this just starting with squares and triangles, then the painting begins. If you have paint, wonderful, okay? If you don't have paint, this has been done with oil pastel, okay? And I use that as an opportunity to introduce the notion of color mixing and color theory. I worked with powder paint, which is tempera. You get this very nice liquid powder paint, but you can also get powder paint in powder form. You always mix powder paint at the bottom of a deep container. You put a little bit of sunlight liquid in, some glue, and you mix it so that a little bit of water at first, so that you get a nice sort of custard consistency. And if your tempera paint is that consistency, then you get a really nice result at the end of the paint, at the end of the lesson. Also, the liner cover takes tempera paint really, really well. So you only give learners 2 of the primaries and white, okay? And you control that in the little patty pan that you give them, or whatever containers you use them, yogurt buckies, whatever. You only give them 2 colors and white. And you can talk about that they can use white as a contrasting color, or they can mix white with one of the primaries so that they get a lighter blue, a darker blue, a brighter yellow, or a darker yellow. So you're also introducing tone and intensity, okay? And yes, that's something that you speak about in higher standards, but actually there's an understanding, a visual understanding, oh, that's what's happening. They don't need to necessarily understand the word intensity or bright, but you can use the word brightness, for example. And so they get onto the painting and they complete an entire strip like this with their pattern already made. And you can see this person that did this for me was not in grade 3. but the pattern can kind of alternate and become more complicated. I'm sorry, I'm switching my left and my right around. So they have done this, and from this point, that is when the box construction happens. Okay, so your little shapes at the bottom, those fold in or up. Very simple folding, and you create the box in 3D, and it's put together. And that box I've called the art box because I've encouraged teachers, you put the box of wax crayons in there, it lives on their desk, it is their box, it is their art box where you have these materials. So my materials are some pencil crayon, some wax crayon, a Prit. You won't necessarily put a scissor in the box for grade 3s, and paints that they can use on their desk. So when the art boxes come out and are put on their desk, then something exciting is going to happen in itself. What I've also done with these boxes, I've laminated it with packaging tape. Okay, so not expensive laminating at a printing store. I've just taken white tape and I've put it over the box, so it's actually a little bit waterproof and splash proof, and it's strong. Now, there are those teachers that are sitting there and that are saying, yeah, but I don't have access to beautiful liner cover and all of that. And what I want to say to you is that I have done this lesson actually using just plain white photocopy paper. This is an A4 page. The measurements here were 6 centimeters. Okay, so a half actually of the box that I created in liner cover. And I have done the boxes as I showed you before, just using very simple wax crayon. And you can also do color mixing with wax crayon. And what I actually did was that I envisaged this, that children could actually shade an entire sheet of paper in wax crayon. So blue and yellow, this is just wax crayon, can be mixed together. You don't need paint, and you get green. This is just wax crayon, and this is not a green crayon. This green is being created from blue and yellow together, and the same with orange. Okay, my yellow sheet is here. So the same with red and yellow, and mixed together gives you orange. So your basic color theory is that, where you can speak about primary color, secondary color, etc. And then what I did was I cut these up into shapes like these that also become the objects, like the bottle tops or the lollipop sticks or whatever you're using to teach or to introduce multiplication, because these can be laid down on the table. So you can make your groups of 4, your groups of 2, your groups of 3, and you can start that counting. And you can do it in triangles, in squares, or whatever. Okay, so just to show you that it is possible, it can still be creative and something hopefully that you will try. Okay, everybody, my time is up.
Let's move out of the screen. Liesl, that was amazing. Again,
Yeah.
we can spend a whole day. How
Yeah.
much maths did we do now? Measurement and 2D, 3D, cylinders, circles, shapes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Everything.
Yeah, everything. We've done the whole curriculum in a fantastic art activity. I really want to thank you. This was, colleagues, just to know that obviously Liesl had to do a turbocharge through an activity that could be a term's work, because if you really take it step by step, scaffold it nicely like she normally does, and build out lots of stimulus and embodiment, then it would take much longer, but she wanted us to give us an idea. Remember, this video will be available for you to look at later on, so that you can, do it in class. And you're most welcome to contact Liesl at the Zeitz for the lesson, and she will take you through the lesson. Of course, you can even invite your learners to the Zeitz if you want to. She will also make that happen. So without further ado, Liesl, thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic. Even I can understand maths now. We are going to say goodbye to Liesl now, and we are going to go back to our big session. Please join us with Dr. Wendy Taylor, Science and the Arts on Steroids. It's absolutely incredible. And then after that, it's the prize giving. Okay, so see you there, everyone. Bye-bye.